So good evening everyone, and welcome to tonight's shiur called Purim, Seeing What You Want to See. Purim is a very special festival because more so than all of the other festivals, it is one that is most intimately related and associated with this physical world. Many of the other festivals are associated with something that is supernatural. Chanukah, Pesach, Shavuot even, the Sukkot, the protection of clouds of glory. But Purim is one that is very intimately associated with the physical world, and really it is the objective of the divine that the divine will be intimately associated, related, and revealed through the physical world without suspending the physical world. In other words, not that the physical world will be suspended, but rather that godly light will shine through the physical world. And this is exactly the objective of the festival and the so-called hidden miracles of Purim, which is very much associated with the objective of the creation of heaven and earth. I'd like to start with asking a few questions. Who was Haman, this evil character that sought to destroy the Jewish people? Why is it that he sought to destroy the Jewish people? Minar vad zaken taf v'nashim. Sought to destroy everyone, whether it's young, whether it's old, whether it's child, whether it's a woman. Doesn't matter who. What exactly was the reason behind his wanting to destroy every single Jew? Why is the Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther, called the scroll of Esther? Why particularly Megillat Esther? It's one of the 24 books of the Holy Script. We have a few of them that are called Megillot. We have a few of them Megillat Ruth, etc. Megillat Echa. This is called Megillat Esther. Why is this from the books of the prophets that is called Megillat Esther, the scroll of Esther? And furthermore, why is it called after Esther and not after Mordechai, which was in fact a very significant player in the miracle of Purim? He was the one that gathered the Jewish people. He was the one that understood what the reason of the decree was and how to avert it. He was the one that was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the leader of the Jewish people. He was the Rebbe of the generation, the Tzaddik of the generation. Why is it not called Megillat Mordechai? And why is it called Megillat Esther? And another very salient and important point, why out of all of the books of the prophets, this does not have the name of God mentioned once in this Megillah? Not once is God's name mentioned. So let us commence and understand that this world is called Ha'olam. Ha'olam shares the same word as Ha'elem. Ha'elem means concealment. This world conceals and belies the truth. This is why the Gemara tells us in Masechet Brachot Alma de Shikrahu. This world is a world of falsehood. What does it mean, a world of falsehood? Does that mean everybody lies? Not necessarily. It means that the world itself belies and tells a different tale. What we see is not the tale of truth. What we see is not the real reality. What is the real reality? The real reality is En od milvado, as we discussed many times. There's nothing else but godliness. And godliness is everything. And therefore what we see and what we feel, that we are a separate entity, what we see, the materialism and physicality and that which lures us away from spirituality, is really a it's a misrepresentation, it's falsehood. We have to go behind the guise and behind the veil, and we have to dig deeper, and for that it takes a lot of meditation. Meditation, I don't mean meditation as in sitting in a room and meditating. What I mean to say, contemplation is perhaps a better word. Meditation is good, but I'm saying In this reference, what I'm talking about is contemplation. One needs to contemplate constantly about God. And when one contemplates about God, one thinks about God, the reality of godliness becomes one with Him. If you're not going to be thinking about God and contemplating deeply about the interaction of the Creator and the interaction and how the world is totally dependent upon God, then your strength of this perception of what you see will be weakened and diminished. You not necessarily see what you need to see. And as I mentioned many times, or a few times rather, that one of the reasons why we cover our eyes when we say the most important prayer, the unification of God, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, we cover our eyes. Why do we cover our eyes? Halachically, in order that we shouldn't be distracted. But on a deeper level, because the unity of God, we don't necessarily, there are many things that we look at and see and does not really represent, hard to say because really everything is godliness. But when we look at the physical world, we don't always see and perceive godliness. So therefore we cover our eyes. Not everything is as we see, as we think, or as we translate it in accordance with what we see. Hence, today's topic is seeing what you want to see, which we'll speak about a little bit later. There's a pasuk that says, "Vanochi haster astir et panai," I will surely conceal my face. Haster astir. That is related to the concept of concealment, and the name Esther. Don't forget, she was called Hadassah. Hadassah, he Esther. Her name, or her primary name, was Hadassah. And the Megillah says, he Esther, this is Esther. So who is Esther? Esther is Hadassah, the relative of Mordechai. That's her name, Hadassah. But she was also called Esther because she reflects the character and the characteristic of the time, what was going on, what Purim is all about, and in fact what the whole world is all about. Concealment of godliness. So what happened on Purim? The whole episode of Purim, the whole Megillat Esther, if you read it, it's an interesting story with many events coming together and seemingly disjointed, not related, not connected one to the other. Different stories about the king making a feast and getting drunk, calling Vashti, and etc. Vashti being the king wanting to humiliate Vashti, as we'll talk about later on. And then she refused to come. The king ordered her to be killed, and then another queen is chosen, and then all of a sudden Haman is glorified, and he becomes a viceroy, and the king commands everybody to bow down to him. Mordechai doesn't bow down to him. The story commences, in fact, with a great meal that the king made in accordance with the customs of all people. Everybody can eat and drink in accordance with their custom and their law, etc., including the Jewish people. And then much time elapses, and all of a sudden, it seems that the king honors all people, all nations. Wow, they're living in a very, very nice, politically correct moment, and all of a sudden, a certain period of time passes, and all of a sudden things turn around for the Jewish people. In fact, it was meant to be a very glorious time for the Jewish people because the Jewish people were expected in a very short period of time, in accordance with the prophecy, that they will come back to Jerusalem and build the second temple. And things seemed to go from bad to worse, and all of a sudden, everything turned around, and a great decree seemed to loom and hover upon the Jewish people. But all of these events were exacting. All of these events were orchestrated by the divine. And when you live through these events, you don't necessarily pay attention and know what's going on. Mordechai did. But the majority of people didn't. They didn't see what was going on. They didn't read correctly what was going on. They didn't bring together all of the events, seeing the divine hand. Even certain things were hidden from Mordechai, as we will soon see. So who is Haman? Haman is a descendant of Amalek. Who is Amalek? The Torah tells us, Reshit Goyim Amalek. Amalek is the head of all impurity. There are 10 emanations, as we know. Intellectual, divided into intellectual and 7 emotional. We know that these 10 correspond to holy emanations or holy characteristics, and they also are the very 10 by which we express ourselves in unholy matters as well. We can think unholy things, we can desire and want unholy things. Everything is created in an equilibrium. And therefore we have 2 dimensions. We have just like the intellect that arouses an emotion. One thinks and contemplates about God, this arouses a love and a respect and awe for God. Similarly, when one thinks about denying God or questions the validity of God and the existence of God, this then leads, or when one is infused with one's own ego and one lacks faith in God, then one then allows himself the freedom to follow the desires and the dictates of his heart. So there are impurities of the world that correspond to the emotions. But the head of all impurity is one that is the head of it all, that which is related to the higher dimension. Amalek represents that part of arrogance and ego and impurity that is the very core of all impurity, that is ego. A sense of self. And when there is self, there is no room for God. And this was Amalek. And that's why it says, Asher karcha b'derech. Amalek came and ensnared the Jewish people. How did he ensnare them? Amalek historically always came before a very opportune historical occurrence. Amalek came and challenged the Jewish people before they received the Torah. Amalek came and again tried to battle and destroy the Jewish people before they entered the land of Israel. Amalek again, through Haman, is coming again to come and challenge the Jewish people just on the threshold, on the cusp, before they are about to build, for the prophecy to be realized, and they're about to build the second temple after the first temple was destroyed. Approximately, it was a little bit of time before 70 years. So they were waiting for the 70 years to elapse, for the prophecy to be realized, and then the Jewish people will merit the second temple. Amalek is begimatria safek. Amalek has the same numerical value of safek. Safek means doubt, which means that the impurity of Amalek is the highest impurity. It's not the impurity of when one has a lust or a passion for something and falls and falters, but then realizes that, well, I made a mistake, I wasn't strong enough, I succumbed to my passions, and then, one can try and extricate and uplift oneself from it. No, Amalek is much deeper than that. Amalek is safek. He throws a doubt. He throws a doubt in the anhagat haboreh, in the guiding hand of God. That God cares for every single one of us and guides our destiny, and every occurrence in this world is divinely ordained and absolutely and totally from God. Nothing is independent of God. Amalek throws a doubt. Amalek, as I mentioned, the name Amalek is the same exact numerical value of the word safek, doubt. Throwing a doubt in everything. Which means to say that Amalek does not seek to defile and cause impurity in our heart and in our emotions, but rather in our mind and in our will and in our faith in God. And this is the most destructive of all. And this is exactly what happened as well with the story of Purim, where, as I mentioned, the Jewish people are on the threshold of entering the land of Israel again and rebuilding the second temple. And again Amalek comes through the embodiment of Haman and tries to uproot all of this, tries to destroy all of this, tries to destroy the Jewish people building a sanctuary for God, and that the divine presence will be felt and real and relevant in our world, as it says, "Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti betocham," make for me a sanctuary when I will dwell within them. Why does it say within them when there was one sanctuary? Because v'chol ehad ve'ehad. The sages tell us because the sanctuary is not only in the tabernacle, but by extension in every single one of us, as David HaMelech says, Ohel shiken ba'adam, the tent of tabernacle God entrusted and placed within man. And therefore Amalek seeks to destroy this, seeks to destroy the fact or the capability or the potential that we can create a unity and a harmony between godliness and the material physical world. That the material and physical world will no longer be a competition, so to speak, or a cause of concealment, but rather it will be so luminous that godliness and the light will penetrate through and shine through, just like the body conceals the soul, although it's obvious that the soul animates the body, but yet we don't see and we don't necessarily feel the soul. It takes a lot of contemplation to be able to feel and understand the power of the soul. And this is what really the concept of the doubt and the concept of concealment. God says, conceal, I will surely conceal myself, but God is everywhere. What does it mean, conceal, I shall surely conceal myself? So I saw written an interesting thing. It is when we conceal ourselves, it is when we don't believe the power that lies within us, don't believe the potential that every single one of us has to be able to connect in a very powerful and meaningful way with God. So when that concealment occurs within us, and when we stray, when we turn, so to speak, away from Hashem, then Hashem can be millimeters, so to speak, from us, yet seem to be very, very distant because we have turned our face. So therefore, when we turn our face, a God seems to be totally concealed, but really it is the power and potential that lies within that has become concealed because we lack the faith. And Amalek is also part of that he sows the seeds of doubt within ourselves. Can we really become spiritual? Can we really feel godliness? And when that happens, when we have doubts and we fall prey to the materialism of the world and we give up on ourselves, we give up on trying to live a spiritual life, and then we live and make the best of the physical world, which really defeats the whole purpose why we came down to this world, because everything of materialism is all about concealment, and our objective is to reveal godliness, that godliness should shine through the vessel, should shine through the body, and that the body should not be dense spiritually, but rather should enable and allow for the luminescence of spirituality to shine through it. Why is the name of God not included? And therefore, let me go back to Amalek. Therefore, the Jewish people are antithesis to Amalek, to what Amalek represents. Amalek represents the essence of all concealment, the denial of God. The Jew, by very definition, Yehudi. Yehudi, the Gemara says, who is a Jew? What is the definition of a Jew? He who repudiates idol worship, multiple deities, multiple powers. There's only one power, and it's only God. And in fact, the very word Yehudi, Jew, does not only come from the fact that we come from Judah, because in fact, we find in the Megillah, it says, Ish Yehudi haya b'Shushan Abira, u'shmo Mordechai ben Yair ben Shibi, ben Kish Ish Yemini. Mordechai was a Jew, it says, Ish Yehudi. And he comes from the tribe of Yemini, of Benjamin. So he's not from the tribe of Judah. So why is he called Ish Yehudi? To point out that he's a Jew? Of course he's a Jew. To point out that the definition of a Jew is one that repudiates anything other than God. He totally cleaves to the unity of God and lives with that reality, sees it and breathes it and feels it. And the word Yehudi, the name Yehudi, spells the name of God. Yud and Hey and Vav. That's already the first three letters of God's name. And the Daled and the Yud, we know that the letter Hey has a Daled and a Yud in the middle. Yehudi is Daled and Yud. Take the Yud from Yehudi and place it in the Daled, and you have the name of God. Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. And the very word Yehudi comes from the concept of lehodot, to acknowledge God, to accept God, to acknowledge God. The word Yehudi means to acknowledge totally the presence of God and the reality of God. And so therefore, Amalek is the very exact opposite of Mordechai, and by extension, all of the Jewish people. Why is it that we don't find the name of God explicit in the Haggadah, only an allusion? How so? The Midrash tells us that there are many times in the Megillah, where the word Hamelech is used, the king. Now sometimes it says Hamelech Ahashverosh and says explicitly the king Ahashverosh, and sometimes it just says Hamelech, Vayavo Hamelech, the king. It doesn't say Ahashverosh. Why sometimes it says Ahashverosh, King Ahashverosh? Why does it say just the king? The Midrash tells us every single time that the name that it says in the Megillah, Hamelech without Ahashverosh, it refers to God, the king of all kings. It's alluding to God. It's hinting to us that God is behind the scenes, so to speak, in a hidden way. Our objective, as we mentioned, is to reveal it, but in a hidden way. And therefore, here we see that the story of Megillah is on multiple layers and levels. A simple person, a child, for example, reads the story of Megillah. To him, it's an interesting story of many, many details coming together. There's a plot. There's a party. There's a plot. There's a there's a laying of the groundwork of the saving of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are finally saved by the intervention of Mordechai and of Esther. And at the end, the Jewish people find freedom, salvation, and that the enemies are destroyed. And then there are those that read it on a deeper level and a deeper level yet. And there are those that find a pattern, those that learn ethical and moral teachings. And there are those that are able to see beyond. And when you substitute Hamelech from being Ahashverosh to Hamelech being God, then the story is a totally different story. Then what we see is a totally different story than what we saw previously. There are those that are able to see the mysteries, the Kabbalistic mysteries, and the hidden configurations of God's name in the Megillah, and many, many things that are hidden behind the Megillah. But when you substitute Hamelech for the King of all kings from King Ahashverosh, then the story that you begin to see is a totally different story. It's a totally different narrative. It's way deep. It tells the story of God as He works through nature, as His divine desire and will. We begin to become accustomed to that. We begin to see it and to feel it. But it all depends on what we are accustomed to hearing and seeing. What we're used to seeing, what we're tuned and sensitive to seeing or hearing. Or, worse still, what we want to see and what we want to hear. What we want to see and what we want to hear. When I say what we want to hear and what we want to see, it's because not necessarily everybody wants to see and hear the hand of God in everything, because it obliges us. It obliges us means to say that we understand that there is a God and thus there is a purpose. And if there is a purpose, then we must strive. And that's hard work. because we are material by nature. We veer and have physical tendencies, desires, and wants, and this physical world is very attractive, and we want to grab as much of it as possible and enjoy as much of it as possible. You can't touch spirituality, but a very nice burger, a very nice pizza, ice cream, you can taste it, very nice, it's palatable. A nice car, a nice home, beautiful view is all appreciated. But for the divine, you have to close your eyes. You have to close your eyes to all of these things. Not everybody's willing to close their eyes to all of these things. As Nachmanides says, that the more material we are, the less spiritual we are. The more spiritual we are, the less material we are. It's hard work. So quite often we see what we want to see. We hear what we want to hear. And so to the Megillah. The Megillah is written in a way to allow us to see what you want to see and to hear what you want to hear. What do you want to hear? What do you want to know? That there's a king, powerful king, who's invited you and gave you the honor and the glory to a great feast and a great meal. And he's honoring you and respecting you, who you are, what you are. Then go for it. What do you want to see? You want to see that things are just accidental occurrences? That things just happen and are disjointed in history and nothing is connected one to the other. There is no connection whatsoever of the Jewish people who participated in the sin, in the Seudah, in the meal, and in accordance with Mordechai, that said you should not participate in the meal for many, many reasons. Least of which the king himself took out the garments of the Kohen Gadol and paraded it and put it on himself, and this perhaps was a very great show of brazenness, for the king was flaunting the fact that the Jewish people are his subjects and they're not going to be returning to Jerusalem, and that the prophecy will not be realized and they will not be rebuilding the temple. He is the high priest. He is the king, the most powerful. He is the most glorious. He has all of the honor and the glory. And by participating in the meal, without getting into the details whether it's kosher or not kosher, because there are opinions that said that everything was kosher. Kirtzon ish va'ish, in accordance with the will and the desire of every person. If you wanted a particular type of kashrut authority, that was there for you. If you wanted a particular type of drink, it was there for you. If you wanted Hakim wine, you can get Hakim wine. If you didn't want Hakim wine, you wanted Golan wine, you can get Golan wine. Whatever wine you want, it's there. Yet Mordechai said, for many reasons which we're not going to get into now, do not participate in the meal. And then much time elapsed, and all of a sudden there was a decree, and people didn't put one and one together. Because time goes by, and you don't see, and you don't hear, and you don't want to know. Oh, is it a consequence of my own actions? Maybe I need to do tshuva. Maybe I need to change my ways. It's hard work. So we prefer not to change our ways. We prefer to attribute it to other reasons. You read the Megillah as you want to read it. You read the story and see what you want to see and what you want to hear. Oh, what good luck, what good fortune. Esther married the king and she saved us. King Ahasuerus had a change of mind. How fortunate. Look how things turned out. Mordechai was persecuted by Haman. Now he became the viceroy. He became the prime minister of, effectively, in those days, the most powerful nation of the world. Wow, how did things turn around? So lucky we had people in the right places. We have the Jewish lobby. We have this. We have AIPAC. We have that. We have people in the right position, the right time. If you want to read that narrative, you can. But it's not true. Because everything was already prepared and orchestrated beforehand. If we have the time to elaborate, we will give a very interesting example. But if you want to look deeper and you want to see the story as really told, if you want to know the true narrative, that the hand of God is behind everything and we have an intimate relationship with God. Have a look at every single day we say Shema. And the Shema says that if you follow the ways of Hashem, Hashem will give rains in the right time. And if you don't, He will stop the rains. Did you ever think and ponder for 1 second that my actions can bring about rains or stop rains? Did you ever ponder? The reason why we don't ponder is because we never think that we have such a global effect on the world. We don't really honor ourselves and who we are to that degree. We are nothing, we are specks. So what's my prayers worth? So I pray because I have to pray, I'm obligated to pray. When I really need something, I pray with extra intention. No, your prayers are very, very powerful. So we take it for granted because the concealment starts within me. And if there's concealment within me, then what I see is a world of concealment and hiddenness of God. And that's what I see. It starts within me, having a lack of faith of my potential and what I am able to achieve in the world. It is a very great, very immense, to such a degree that God says, because of your actions, I will bless the world with rains, or because of your actions, I will withhold the world from rains. Not as a punishment, but just to teach you how valued you are and what an intimate relationship you have with God and with the world. You have a very great relationship, a great influence in the world. But that's a very empowering thought, and we are somewhat uncomfortable with such a thought, and sometimes we even doubt that thought, and that's Amalek. Amalek, as we mentioned before, is a numerical value of doubt. We doubt that. Never doubt that. That's the whole story of Purim. Never doubt you. Never doubt yourself. Never doubt the hand of God. Never doubt the relationship that you have with Hashem and with the whole world. And how your actions, whether you go to a meal or you don't go to a meal, has a global effect. Has a global effect. The Jewish people many Jewish people didn't want to believe Mordechai. He went, he taught, he said they didn't want to hear him, they didn't want to listen to him. Because they didn't want to see. They weren't able to see what he saw. And maybe some didn't want to see what he saw. Because they wanted to follow what they thought, what seemed to be the right thing, the politically correct thing to do. And they did the politically correct thing to do. In the eyes of the king. Which king? In their eyes, Ahashverosh. But Mordechai read things differently. The king does not refer to the king Ahashverosh. The king really means the king of all kings. He saw things differently. His story, his narrative was deeper and higher. And thus he was teaching the Jewish people this narrative. Now things are not coincidental. And like Moshe Rabbeinu, Mordechai had another name. Moshe Rabbeinu, as I explained one time in one of my drashot, that Moshe Rabbeinu had a few different names. Each one refers to a different type of quality that Moshe Rabbeinu had, yet he wasn't named any of these names. Tuvia, one of his names is Tuvia. Tuvia is that the goodness of God, he brought the goodness of God, revealed the goodness of God to the world. Yekutiel, he's called after Batya, the name that Batya gave him, an Egyptian princess, the daughter of none other than the wicked King Pharaoh. Why? Because she went out of her way to save a child. And he's given the name Moshe, for I have taken him out of the water. All of the other names are great spiritual names that have great spiritual meanings. He wasn't called that name. He was called the name after a lady that saved him. Because one person can save a world, can change the whole direction of the world. Would you have thought that if you were sitting around with Batya on the riverside bathing, having some marshmallows, toasting it on the fire, and Batya says, Uza, I hear a child, and go out, and she goes and saves the child. Would you have thought that she's saving the whole Jewish nation, bringing a revolution, a spiritual revolution to the world that culminated in the giving of the Torah? You've never dreamt it. Batya also never dreamt it. But one action can change the whole trajectory of the whole world. One action of ours can change the whole world. Very significant, very powerful. This is when we doubt ourselves. And that's Amalek, that poisons and erodes the very core of our identity and who we are. So, Mordechai had another name, and his another name was Petahya. Petahya means, open up, O God. Opening up a new level, a new dimension, a new vista. Looking at things from a different perspective. We know that there are 4 letters to God's name, Yud and Hey, and Vav and Hey. The first 2 letters of God's name refer to a higher component of revelation, more the intellectual, the more intimate revelation of God. The intellect is very intimate with me. Nobody knows what I'm thinking. But my emotions and my speech, Vav and Hey, refers to Vav, the 6 emotions, and the last letter Hey refers to my speech, or God's emotion. And God's speech means to say God's characteristics and the way He reveals Himself, and His speech meaning to say the revelation of this physical material world. Those are the lower dimensions of godly revelation. The higher, the more intimate revelation, godly revelation, is the letter Yud and the Hey. The more the intellectual component, and also contained within it the Uketz Shel Yud, the little point of the Yud that hints to Keter, crown, the divine will, which is the very core identity of who we are. Tahya. And therefore Mordechai was his function in that generation was to open the eyes to God, to a higher dimension of God, to a high revelation of God, seeing things in a totally different light. This was the objective of Mordechai. And that's why it's called Megillat Esther. Megillat Esther comes from the word Gilui, to reveal. Why is Megillat Esther called Megillat Esther? The scroll of Esther. Why not just the book of Esther, the book of Yehezkel, the book of Ishaya, the book of Daniel? Why Megillat Esther? Because Megillah comes from the word Gilui, to come and reveal that which is concealed. Esther means it's concealed. That which is concealed, that which we don't see properly. So if so, call it Megillat Mordechai, because Mordechai represents the concept of revelation. Betahya, seeing things in a different level. Esther refers to the world as is in its most limiting concealment. Megillat Esther means to reveal godliness that is hidden behind the concealment, and that the world no longer presents a concealment, an impediment to godliness. And that's why it's called Megillat Esther. Another reason why it's called after Esther and not Mordechai is because Esther actually was willing to sacrifice herself totally. As she said, avadati, avadati. And if I'm destined to be lost, I will be lost. In other words, Mordechai tells her, go in front of the king. The right time, go in front of the king. Now's the right time. And she said, how can I go in front of the king? One of the laws is that no one is allowed to present themselves before the king without permission. ואני לא נקראתי לבוא אל המלך 30 יום. I haven't been called to the king 30 days. Obviously, I'm not in his good graces, or maybe he's too preoccupied, or whatever the case may be. ואני לא נקראתי לבוא אל המלך זה 30 יום. I haven't been called to the king for these last 30 days. אחת דתו להמית. We know the rule is anybody comes before the king, אחת דתו להמית. The rule is that he will be put to death. This is one of the laws already in the time of Vashti, where Haman already, when Haman suggested that Vashti should be killed, one of the laws is that nobody comes before the king. That the queen, Vashti, cannot come and plead before the king. And then, so who's, and then the king will forgive her. But then hang on, who advised you to go and do this stupid thing and execute me? Haman. Then she'll come and take revenge on Haman. So Haman said, I'm suggesting the king advice with the story of Vashti. You remember the story of Vashti, that she refused to come in front of the king. We don't have time to explain all of this right now. And Haman, Memuchan, which is called one of the names, Memuchan, he suggested to the king that this is something that is outrageous. Can't have a queen denigrate the honor of the king. And in order to protect himself, he also instituted that nobody comes before the king unannounced without being called. To protect himself, that lest she come and ask for forgiveness and the king will forgive her, he's now the bad guy. And he had a reason. And the partnership between Haman and Ahasuerus seems to be a strange one. Why all of a sudden, Gidal HaMelech Taman Ben Amedat, he made him so great? Why? Because he just gave that advice. What's the story behind it? It's very interesting. We don't have time to explain now. We'll do it on another occasion. But there's a reason behind everything. And now Esther wants to come and plead before the Jewish people. Mordechai says, go and plead before the Jewish people. She said, I can't. The law is, if I do, I can be put to death. Taking a big risk here. Maybe I should wait until I'm called. No, now is the time. She said, okay. So she risked her life. And when a person is willing to risk a life, when does a person risk a life? When is a person willing to give everything and all for godliness, for his nation, for spirituality? When you reveal the inner part of your soul. That's where you find that strength to do so. Where it's not hidden anymore. It's not concealed anymore. Because a person wants to live. When you're able to do that, when you reveal what's called Yehidah Shebanefesh, the highest, the pinnacle of the soul. And because of her self-sacrifice, which represents the essence and reveals the essence of the soul, because how can you reveal the essence of the soul? Not when you're just laying on a couch and watching television, but when you're working, toiling to refine yourself, to work on yourself, thinking and pondering about godliness and trying to apply it, making it a reality in your life, making godliness a reality in your life. It's not a simple, easy thing. You have to peel away the layers and get to the core of who you are. That takes work. That takes sacrifice. Where there is self-sacrifice, that's when that part of the soul is most revealed. And therefore, how do we remove the concealment, the astir, the Esther of the world, the concealment of the world, the facade of the world, the falsehood of the world, through self-sacrifice, through commitment and dedication. And that's why it's called Megillat Esther. You want a Megillah, you want to reveal, it has to be through the example of Esther, the sacrifice. Now, when one person sacrifices, can save the whole Jewish world, can save the whole world, can bring redemption to the whole world. So Esther was willing to sacrifice for her ideals for the Jewish people. But what happened? One could read the story, and one can say, hang on a minute. We have people in high places, so it all turned out okay if you're reading the story the way you want to read it, the way you want to see it. But you would be missing one point. And that one point is, hang on a minute. What did they do first? Esther said, Lech kenos et kol ha-Yehudim. Go and gather all of the Jewish people. Betzumu alai laila vayom. Fast for me night and day. V'gam ani v'narotai atzum ken. And me and my maids, servants will also fast. By fasting, you're not going to ingratiate yourself to the king and be graceful. You're going to be very weak if you're fasting. You'd want to be able to look your best. So she's doing the wrong decision, you would argue, no? No, because she Mordechai understood that this is all coming because of a heavenly thing. because of the impurity of Amalek and what it represents, the concept of the hiddenness of God, the lack of faith in ourselves, the lack of faith in God, the lack of seeing the hand of God in everything. It's not easy. It's not easy. It's comfortable to be the way we are. But then something comes along, historically or individually, and shakes all of that, and causes us and forces us to shake and awaken from our slumber. On that night, the slumber of the king was aroused, so to speak. Means to say that through the prayer and the fasting of the Jewish people, the slumber of the sleep, so to speak, of the king of all kings, doesn't say Ahasuerus, it says the king. That is one of the verses of redemption that the whole community reads together out loud in unison. Because, so to speak, we aroused within ourselves. We also aroused, so to speak, the compassion of God. We turned our face towards God. God turned his face towards us, so to speak. Hashem shomrecha, Hashem tzilecha, al yad yaminecha. God guards you, but God is like your shadow. You turn to one side, the shadow follows you. You turn this way, the shadow follows you. You turn your back, then the shadow's behind you. What you choose to see, what you choose to hear. If you choose to see God right next to you, with you, escorting you, then that's what you'll see. If you choose not, then that's also what you see. So they chose to fast. They chose to pray because they understood where it's coming from. And then and only then, and you cannot ignore that fact. Yes, the story is a nice story. All the pieces seem to come into place. But you cannot ignore that one fact. And that's clearly written in the Megillah, no matter how simple of a reading and an approach and an interpretation and a narrative you read. You cannot ignore the fact that they gathered the Jewish people. Jewish unity is very powerful. And they fasted and they prayed. And they turned their attention to God. And then they had someone who was willing to sacrifice on their behalf. And that aroused within them a big, deep commitment to godliness, to the extent that they were willing to sacrifice themselves no matter what to Judaism. They came to a solid core resolution. No matter what, we will remain strong to our faith and our beliefs no matter what. And we will choose to see the narrative as it really is in heaven, not as it seems to play out on earth by earthly kings and human beings who we try and cull favor with, etc. But cull favor with the Almighty, the King of all kings. And this is the reason why it's called Megillat Esther. And why Megillat, meaning revealing that which is concealed. And this is the reason why Mordechai has another name. Petah Yah. Open up the ability to see godliness from a higher vista, from a higher point of view. Okay, are there any questions? We didn't have time to give some examples of how everything was so exacting in the Megillah. I wanted to, but we didn't have time to do so. Hopefully we can do it on another occasion. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to hear them.